afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's panel, Continental Shift, Tackling Illicit Trade in Europe, hosted by Economist Impact. I'm Chris Clegg, a Senior Research Manager for Policy and Insights with Economist Impact. And I would like to thank Philip Morris, first and foremost, for supporting today's event and making it possible. And I would like to thank our four excellent panelists for joining us today, and I will introduce them shortly. And I would like to thank everybody who's decided to join this webinar for taking part. Just a couple of quick reminders, or one really quick reminder. Please use the Q&A function during the session to submit your questions if you have any. You can direct them to any of the specific panelists, and that would be much appreciated. So we're talking about illicit trade in the context of Europe today. Many types of illicit trade have been on the rise as a result of the pandemic. One of the causes of this, of course, is the surge in e-commerce, along with the accelerated digitalization in consumer-facing industries. So there's more online fraud, there's more counterfeit products, and then there's also stricter border regulations, which has driven a lot of the illicit trade that came from outside of Europe to inside of Europe. And one thing that we'd like to touch upon in the course of the discussion today is Germany's role in all of this. Obviously, Germany is the largest trading country in the EU, and illicit trade tends to follow illicit trade. So that means Germany has a role to play in all of this. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our four panelists and ask them to give some brief introductory remarks before we get into the conversation about these and other issues with regards to illicit trade in Europe. So first is Stefano Betti, Deputy Director General for the Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade, otherwise known as TRACIT. Thank you for joining us, Stefano. Laurent Giesendanner, Head of Legal Operations and Corporate Security with Syngenta. Alvis Giustintani, Vice President, Illicit Trade Prevention, Philip Morris International, the supporter of today's event. And finally, last but not least, Arndt Sinn, Professor of Criminal Law, University of Osnabrück. So, starting with Stefano. Stefano, your TRACIT just recently released a report on forced labor and illicit trade. I was wondering, to get us started today, if you could talk a little bit about the contents of that report and what the findings were.
Absolutely, and thank you very much, Chris, and thanks to the organizer for having me here today and for inviting Tracy to this event. Yes, this event here is taking place at a very timely moment because yesterday there was a launch of an important report that was drafted by Tracy with the collaboration and with the input of the various companies that form the membership of TRACIT. And this report is the first one that looks for the first time at the relationship, at the interplay between illicit trade and issues of forced, including child labor, right? This report fits into the broader activities that TRACIT as an organization performs in terms of addressing the social and economic impact of illicit trade. And we do so by seeking to shape the policy response at the governmental level, strengthen law enforcement mechanisms, and also gathering the business community across the sectors that are most impacted by illicit trade to sort of try to unify their voice and address this issue in a more effective manner. And as part of this broad mandate of TRACIT, we also include an awareness raising component. Awareness raising that is not necessarily or not only directed to consumers, which is of course important, but also for the policy making agencies and law enforcement entities. Okay? And so this new report aims at sensitizing these sort of constituencies to what seems to be a big and increasing problem worldwide, right? And yesterday at the launch, we basically had three messages for our audience. And these messages we were very happy that were supported by a panel of speakers, of distinguished speakers that basically supported the following. The following is number one, among the worst consequences of illicit trade is the demand that it creates for forced labor. Okay? And through the report, we show several incidents of forced labor that are reported all along illicit supply chains. And no supply chain seems to be immune from this. We are talking, that ranges from mineral extraction to counterfeit manufacturing and so on and so forth. The most impressive thing, data that we collected, is that the nexus between illicit trade on the one hand and forced labor on the other hand is largely unexplored. So there are initiatives handling forced labor on the one hand and illicit trade on the other one, but there is no connection between the two. Okay? So this is a largely unexplored area where we call for further attention, research, and data collection as an urgent manner, as an urgent matter, let's say. I very much invite everybody to take a look at this report. It's now fully available on Traceit website with all the associated material, and encourage everybody to disseminate it because we think it is an important matter to highlight. Because think about it, and just to conclude, we have frequently reports of forced labor incidents occurring along supply chains that are legal in nature, because the companies that handle the supply chain do not see or do not know or have missed certain incidents. So can you imagine the extent of the problem in supply chains that are illegal, that are managed by criminal networks who act without any sort of concern for human rights and so on and so forth. So this is in a nutshell what the report is about and what prompted us to draft it.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction, Stefano. What do you find any incidences of this in Europe, or is it mostly Europe is a source of end demand, taking advantage of forced labor along the illicit supply chains in other countries?
Oh, incidents of forced labor have been reported in Europe for a long, long time. And then one example, for instance, is Italy. Some criminal organizations that used to manage counterfeit manufacturing around Naples, the Camorra in particular, have been shown using forced labor of people from Asian origins in these factories very extensively. There have been reports about this dating from 2014. So this is certainly an issue that exists in the European Union, and it is closely linked to the illegal migration fluxes that get into the territory of the European Union, definitely.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're going to come back to that topic a little bit later. Laurent, if you could go next, and I'll ask you the same question that I am going to ask Elvis in a moment when you're done, is why is Syngenta interested in this topic? Why is it important to Syngenta?
Sure. So the context for us is around, Syngenta is the world leader in crop protection products and is the number 3 in the seeds area. And I always see surprise on the face of people when I explain that, well, that there is a number of industries. It's a common knowledge that some industries like the luxury, the luxury industry or the pharmaceutical are heavily impacted by counterfeit. it is not obvious that crop protection, which means products that are used by farmers to make sure that they can achieve their yield and produce at the end of the day food to feed the planet, that those products are counterfeited as well. Same with seeds. You would not believe that we see fake tomato seeds or fake corn seeds that are popping up around the planet. Why is it important to us? Well, when we started our anti-illicit trade program 10 years ago, we had a few cases here and there, and I was coming from the pharma industry, and where it was of course much more active. And then we started to implement the program, progressing slowly, and realized now with time that actually we internally made progress to make people aware about the risk of or the exposure of anti-illicit trade. And I must say, in the same timing, the criminals realize that, and I'm sure Alvis will say something about this, that there are industries that are much more organized, that have trained for a long time law enforcement, that have explained to the public the risk of pharmaceutical, for example, the risk of not being careful when you buy a product. The organized crime realized that this is not yet the case so much with our industry. And if I take translate this in a practical example, if you would have two trucks coming from, let's say, an eastern border, wherever pick up the country, or Latin America, from one country in Latin America to another, the custom officer would know exactly what to do when the truck is full of bags of medicines, or other type of goods like computers. If they are not, it's very clear and easy, I would say, for custom officers to know what to do. Now, if they see a truck that is full of, 10 pallets of soybean seeds in bags with, the company name, etc., would they know exactly? Have they been trained to exactly know what to do? I would say, well, of course, we and I come to this point in few seconds. Of course, in some places is the case, but we are far from having the right level of understanding from all the players. So, if I am a bit more practical and sharing, because it's all about sharing practices and collaborating together, that we can progress and make the difference. So for us at Syngenta, the corporate security team is using a 3 steps approach for our anti-illicit trade program. This is about detect, respond, and deter. Detection means obviously how do we train people internally and externally to identify that there is something that seems not genuine or not logical. The place where this product is entering a country, we have specific routes, and if the products are entering a country from an harbor where we are not usually dealing, harbor authority in that place should know what to do with this and should contact us. So the detection is for us a very important element of awareness, as I said, both internally and externally. The respond is then when we have the right collaboration established with law enforcement, when we know that we have supported by also our legal colleagues, being able to find the right arguments so that identify the right regulatory items that can be used to encourage, motivate law enforcement to act. In some places, there is very limited law that exists about the type of product that the counterfeit product in our area. So we need to find solutions to help law enforcement to react to those and respond to those incidents that we may identify. That together would create deterrence. When criminals start to see that their trucks are stopped regularly, they start to act differently. We also look at technology and see how we can make the authentication of our products faster and more reliable. How can we make the life of criminals a bit more difficult when it comes to copying the same look and feel of our bags by making our bags more difficult to copy. All of this is part of our program, if you like: detect, respond, and deter. Maybe I'll make one final point, if you allow me, Chris, on the last 2 years and the COVID situation. My main comment would be that we should not underestimate our enemy. Organized crime saw a great opportunity to expand their activity online because of COVID. Farmers were, in our case, the farmers were maybe had more difficulties to go to their distributor physically and order their products online. The criminals, they saw this, and they significantly accelerate their online presence, and they use all sorts of techniques, and they use all sorts of specialists that they subcontracted, like really a big company, to create a training campaign, a fake training campaign on YouTube or on Snapchat. Who would believe this? Or they created a forum on Facebook for young farmers in a country so that they can connect with them and start to give them real, at the beginning, what looks like real advices on the weather, for example, to establish the contact and being able to sell product to those farmers. So the COVID has generated a shift in the way, or increased the ability for the criminals to reach out to the farmers, and that's an additional challenge for us. And it's a place where we are extremely and more active due to the situation. I would stop here, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laurent. We'll come back to some of those issues you raised, especially around public-private cooperation and how e-commerce has benefited illicit trade during the pandemic. I do want to turn to Alvis now and pose to you the same question I posed to Laurent, which is why is Philip Morris, why is PMI interested in this issue? Why is it important to your firm?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and hello to everybody. I get that question, why does Philip Morris care? Why are we interested in fighting illicit trade? But let me, before I answer that question, come back to Laurent that was saying that law enforcement cannot detect if the seeds in a bag are genuine or not. I think, Laurent, I fully sympathize for your issue, and that's not only for your company. Law enforcement can easily detect if it's drugs, if it's arms, but when it comes to your product, our product, cigarettes, they don't know if those cigarettes are genuine or not, because counterfeiters make very good counterfeiters of cigarettes. So I fully sympathize for the issue you're facing, in educating, training law enforcement is clearly one of our activities. But coming back to your question, which is very relevant, why do we care? I think we care for different reasons, but let me list 3 important reasons why our company, Philip Morris, cares in fighting illicit trade. The first one is because it impacts governments. It impacts the revenues of the governments because they're losing taxes. Taxes, if you take the recent report from KPMG on Europe, is stating around 8.5 billion euros lost in Europe to illegal illicit sales of cigarettes. So European countries are losing 8.5 billion euros per year. In Germany, that figure is around 1.5 to 2 billion euros per year lost for illicit trade. On cigarettes only, I'm talking. So imagine what the governments in Europe, especially in a moment of crisis like now, could do with that money in terms of building infrastructure, schools, and hospitals. So that's the first reason why we care. Second is because it impacts economies. So, Chris, you're mentioning that illicit trade follows legal trade. Yes, and that impacts it. So you have the illicit trade who is taking away jobs from the legal trade. We have cases in our sectors where tobacconists stop activities because the illicit trade in the area is too high, so they're not selling in their shops. So it impacts the economy, it impacts real jobs in everybody's neighborhood. And the first reason why we care, and maybe I should have put this as the first one, is because it impacts the consumers. The consumers are the real victims of illicit trade. Many consumers, especially now where the trade has moved significantly on e-commerce and social platforms and you name it, many consumers are buying illicit products, counterfeited products, unwittingly because they trust those platforms. They trust, and I think Lauren made that examples how these smugglers and organized crime put up Facebook's pages. So, and if I, as a consumer, go and buy something on Amazon, just to make that example, I trust that platform. And I go and look for a good deal, but I trust that that product is a genuine one. So the real victims are the consumers that unwittingly are buying counterfeit illegal products online, not knowing it. It's not that you go and buy it in a seedy alley where you know that maybe you're trying to have a good deal and a knockoff, where then you know what you're doing. So it is. These are the three reasons why we care and why my company, Philip Morris, is putting a lot of resources against it. I'm leading that department, which is around a worldwide department with people in different hubs around the world, or around 100 people. So 100 people in Philip Morris are fully dedicated in fighting day in and day out, week after week, the smuggling and counterfeited products. So I'll stop it there, Chris, and I'm looking forward to the debate and the questions and with my colleague panelists.
The e-commerce issue is an important one, and I want to come back to that and allow the other panelists to weigh in during the discussion after Arndt is finished with his introductory remarks. But I want to ask you about consumer awareness, and do you see differences? Obviously, we're talking about Europe today, somewhat more specifically Germany, but do you see any differences within regions or countries about how aware consumers are of this issue?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a big issue, and it's a big topic, and it's a good question. From my perspective, the consumer education is a major issue that has not been yet adequately recognized by policymakers, especially in Germany. Many consumers do not know, for example, that entire internet stores are totally fake. That means that a site may look that in maybe internet pharmacy, but in reality, it's a trading platform selling counterfeit medicines. And consumers also doesn't know how to use the safety features on real stores, real internet pharmacies. And I'm talking a lot of times with policymakers, and I talk with them, okay, please make an awareness campaign. Please talk to the public and tell them what are the safety features on online pharmacies. I don't know, maybe here are all specialists. You know that green, white special logo for online pharmacies. And we established also other measures against the falsified medicines and the internet platforms. So I think there's a big lack of consumer education. And if I give some presentations also to not only to the academia, also to the public, then I ask the audience, do you know how to sell a little bit more safe your products online? And most of people never heard about some safety structures or safety features on online stores.
Yeah, with the consumer awareness, I wonder, and maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, I wonder if this hasn't been framed the wrong way in the past, and the way that if it is communicated to the general public, it maybe isn't communicated in a compelling way. And you brought up safety. I think that's certainly one, right? And that goes back to something Lawrence said about pharmaceuticals, right? But it extends to the automotive industry. It extends to the aviation industry. Illicit counterfeit products imperil consumer safety. They imperil public safety, and that's doesn't seem to me to be emphasized quite enough. And then the other one other question I'd like you to respond to, or the other aspect of this, is the extent to which illicit trade, counterfeit goods, fake goods, goes towards funding transnational crime and international terrorist organizations? Because it seems to me that angle. I've only been working on this for 7 or 8 years. You guys are all more experienced than I am, but it seems to me that angle doesn't get emphasized nearly enough. And I'll pose the same question to Stefano in a moment.
Yeah, thank you. To your first point, we have to face that organized crime make money per year around about 870 billion US dollars. More than half of that 870 billion US dollars are from the fake industry. But on the other hand, there is no prioritization in the policy circle of the European Union for fake products. Only it's fraud, of course. Fraud and also tax fraud is a part of the prioritization in the new SOCTA, the Serious and Organized Crime Threat Assessment 2021. But all other fake products are not prioritized. That's European Union. And also, we have not a prioritization in Germany for fake products. So if you speak about the awareness, about consumer education, if you have not a prioritization in the law enforcement for the policymakers, then how you can do a prioritization for the consumers? And that's a big problem that we have to face. If we don't prioritize on European level the fake industry and fight against falsified products, then we will not have a prioritization in the states, and we will not have a big consumer education and awareness. And it's a petty crime in a lot of countries to buy fake products. It's nothing. Only if you do that in a business way, if you buy 50 t-shirts or whatever. And if you come to the customs, then they see that, okay, they take away. But if you buy 1 or 3, then nothing happened. Of course, and to give the people the awareness, you work very hard for your money. You work very hard for your salary and you pay taxes. And then you give that money to the organized crime. Maybe that will be a game changer. And I hope people will listen to that.
Okay, thank you. So, Stefano, I said I was going to go to you next. Same question about consumer awareness, consumer education. Has it, to the extent that it's been done, is it been done correctly? Has the message been the right one?
Thanks for asking this question, Chris. It's a complex one. And I think, yes, consumer education is really critical. And I agree with the premise also of the seminar, whereby generally consumers are still ignorant to illicit trade and its effects, that then they buy fake stuff online, they trust the platforms through which this stuff is sold, and so on and so forth. But the problem is that when we talk about consumer education, this is very important, but it's often easier said than done in a way. Because many education campaigns have been carried out in the past 10, 15 years, targeting various products, okay? And I am honestly not sure that most of these campaigns were successful, and there are many reasons. I think a successful education campaign to consumers is a very complicated public relations exercise. You need to target the right groups of people with the right message and through the right platforms. And you should probably avoid understanding consumers and perceiving them as an homogeneous category of people, okay? Because society is very diverse. I think that a lot can be learned from campaigns that are very active and very aimed at stemming the illicit wildlife trade. So we're not exactly talking about counterfeiting, right? But because a lot of experience has been accumulated in this in this domain, especially in Asia. And for example, those that manage those campaigns to ensure that demand for, I don't know, rhino horns would stop from Africa to Asia, these people realize, for example, that it doesn't make sense to convince or to send a similar message to the high-level people in Asian circles that consume rhino horns or pangolin scales as a dish in a restaurant. You cannot convince them to stop this by telling them that poor pangolin is being killed in Africa. You cannot just act on this. You need to act on different drivers. You need to tell them, for example, that eating a pangolin is not something that is going to maintain his social status in that environment. So I think that all these messages and these campaigns have to be very carefully calibrated to the group and subgroup of people that you are aiming at, in a way. And it's a complicated exercise, in a nutshell.
Alvis, I have a question for you in a moment, but I want to follow up with Laurent on this. Consumer education, your consumers are farmers. So what are you doing? What does Syngenta do in terms of education to identify and, pardon the pun, weed out illicit goods in your among your customers?
Well, that's again the collaboration between the different players within our organization, but also and with a huge support from the industry association, in our case CropLife International, where through their campaigns where they because it is not, of course, only it would be wrong and it would not work to only do this company per company. It needs to be an effort from an industry, because you have a much broader, bigger audience if you use the industry association to be able to make farmers aware, make distributors aware, and additional players. As we said earlier, the collaboration with law enforcement is key, and sometimes when we have success with cases collaborating with law enforcement, the law enforcement is then now making public statement and press articles that are very well received when it's done by law enforcement, where sometimes if it's done by a big international company, people are less interested by the article. So talking about crime, being open about it, help people realize that they are exposed. Again, help them do not underestimate the enemy. And for the farmers, help them realize the reality of the problem in which we are. And it's always, I think, the security exercise is always to avoid crying out for the wolf. So we need to have a very good timing. That's why what Stefano mentioned about the difficulty of the exercise is that, well, for the example about Germany, Germany compared to countries where we have high presence of counterfeit, let's say in Asia, Germany, we don't see, in let's say, in our industry, you don't see fake seeds in the street, so to say, where in other countries it's the case. So how do you make German farmers or farmers from other EU countries, for that matter, aware with the right dynamic of awareness, so that you try to put a scenario that is like, well, those guys have been under too much coffee this morning. What's the problem? There's a need to make the awareness coherent with the reality or with the perception of the public, to be able to slowly but surely move them. And I think that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you for that. Alvis, I'll allow you to expand on that topic if you'd like to, but I also want to ask you a question from the other side, the supply side, I suppose, which is the e-commerce platform, which you mentioned and which have been mentioned by all of the panelists so far. Do you think that law enforcement should make a more concerted effort to go after the legitimate e-commerce platforms that are selling these goods. Aren't mentioned that there are clearly fake platforms online that are doing this, but it's also being sold through legitimate platforms. So if you want to talk about consumer education and then move on to that question, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, look, a lot has been said on consumer, and I subscribe for what the other panelists have been saying. It is a complex issue. Solving illicit trade is a complex issue, and you need a comprehensive strategy, and part of the strategy is also educating consumers. Stefano went and articulated the description of how complex it is, so I won't go further. That one I fully subscribe. It's not straightforward. But I want to just come back to one point that Arndt made, but I think he nailed it on the head. And the point is that until governments think and there's no laws that are tackling counterfeit for what it is, a serious crime, and it's considered a petty crime, I think until that is solved from the very top, I think we have a hard problem. That's where it has to start. Educating the consumer, yes, but educating the politicians, the government, they need to take the right steps, the right regulation. It starts with regulation in order to fight that. And you mentioned SOCTA, yes. So I think we're going in that direction, but there's still a lot to be done, and it has to start. It has to start from the top. It has to start from there. So I think, yes, Arndt, you really made a very, very good point, which I fully subscribe, and that's what we as a company is trying to do, is elevate the issue and moving it from a petty crime to what it really is, which is financing organized crime. So that's it. Now, coming to have a question on e-commerce and platforms. Technology, we all are using technology, and we all are benefiting from, especially in the moment we are locked down, using e-commerce and being able to order things online and so on. And I think these companies are doing a fantastic job. So the fintech companies are moving the world extremely fast forward. But there's a big but. Regulation is not following fast enough. And it's always the case that regulation cannot regulate something which is not there yet, so they are always lagging behind. And I do think that there's quite an issue there on what I just mentioned, that regulation follows lags, but also the fact that these platforms are international. Before, if you had a shop in one country, it was selling the goods, if it's in Italy to the Italians, if it's Germany to the Germans, and now you have a platform based in Germany selling to Asia consumers with the servers in, I don't know, in Norway. So it's much more difficult to regulate these, the e-commerce and the international platforms or social media, you want to name it. So regulation needs to follow. And actually, right now, the European Community has a draft law exactly to do that, and the United States also are doing something, or I think they're a bit lagging behind. So regulation clearly is one issue that needs to be solved. That leads me to the next point I want to make, which is that in this vacuum or these gaps, there's a lot of organized crime or groups which are taking advantage of these gaps and are exploiting these gaps. And I do think that the platform themselves need to step up the game and need to take more responsibility and accountability. I don't think that a platform can say, it's not me doing it, it's only that I'm providing a platform, and then people can use my platform. If I'm a shop owner and I sell products to my clients in my shop, I'm responsible for the product I'm selling. What this platform is saying is, it's not my responsibility because I'm just providing a platform. It's you, whoever it is, that wants to sell these products, are you responsible. I think these organizations need to step up their responsibility and take the accountability that they are the front face to consumers. Consumers go on these platforms and trusting the platform. So they think that the platform is doing the screening and they're selling genuine product. So I do think there's a lot to be done in educating consumers, but even educating the platform themselves, they need to take up their accountability. which in some ways, if you see what's happening now with Facebook and the CEO of Facebook, which has been summoned many times in the U.S. Congress to test the testimony and to testify and to answer questions. So I think society is moving, but these organizations need to be held more responsible. They need to do it voluntarily and by hopefully the regulations which are going to come. Sorry for my long answer, but I do feel very passionate about this.
No, I appreciate that, Avis. One quick question. You've heard me speak about this before when I'm not moderating and I'm on the editorial side of things about prosecuting individuals for money laundering. And I'm going to pose a question to Arndt about this in a moment. Do you think, you talk about the e-commerce platforms being held responsible. Do you think that individuals within these platforms should be held criminally responsible for the amount of counterfeit goods that go through their channel?
Thank you for that question. And we have a new crime in our criminal code since summer this year. It's the platform responsibility. If you establish a platform, especially darknet platforms, and on that platform, you only give them the opportunity to sell. You know, there are some vendors on that platforms. And if you know on your platform, the people will sell illegal goods, doing illegal trade, beginning from drugs and ending from weapons or ransomware or whatever, crime as a service, a big business in the darknet for the organized crime, then you are responsibility. Then you commit a crime and you are responsible for that. It's not only for darknet, it's also for the surface web. If you have such a platform and you know it's a legal platform, but if you know on that legal platform also illegal goods were sold or sell, then you will be responsible. We had a big discussion in the academic under the colleagues and in the academia, is that from the perspective of the dogmatics, is that okay, or is the cooperation and the conspiracy enough to punish that people? From my perspective, I gave also a statement for that, and I think it's correct, because we have two sides. One side is the investigation, the procedure law, and the other side is to punish people. But before you can punish people, you have to do the investigation. And often you can't find a link to the criminals, to the illegal trade from the perspective of the platform, the people they establish such platforms. So what in Germany the legislator did is to make it easier for the investigation, and then you can easier make the trial and accuse such platforms, and also you can take down. So that's a special link between the criminal law and the criminal procedure law.
Well, okay, thank you for that, Arndt. Let me put a little bit. Let me ask you a follow-up question, put a little bit of a finer point on it, and relate this to money laundering, right? So the banks that have been prosecuted for this and have faced fairly large fines know that it's the cost of doing business. Like, they still make profits off of it, right? If you find any of these large international investment banks, it's not really that much of a penalty. Do you think that individuals within the banks or the e-commerce platforms should be held responsible individually for these crimes?
Of course they should help. Of course they should help. And they have a lot of information about that. But you know, the situation about money laundering in Germany is not the best. I can't tell you what is the best situation, because under the rule of law and from our framework of the constitutional, it's not so easy to make a broader sense of money laundering, or to bring a broader sense to money laundering. So, and then it's also not easy to find the criminals in that criminal groups, because if the organized crime groups want to do money laundering, we know that they buy a service. As crime is a service, they find other groups in the financial systems. They are also involved in this economic field, and they pay them for money laundering. It's not only the traditional money laundering, it's also the trade-based money laundering here. And of course, if banks have some information, they should help, they can help. But it's not so easy to bring them to give us the information, or bring the law enforcement agency that information, because on the one hand, you have your customers. They want to trust you. And if you work together with the law enforcement agency, then customers will say, what? My bank is working together with the law enforcement agency. I don't agree with that. But also here we need a customer awareness to say it's for you, because money laundering, that is poison for our society.
Right. Okay, well, we've only got about 10 minutes left, and I want to give each of you a chance for some closing remarks on this issue. But one topic I do want to address, which we've talked about in using e-commerce as a sort of an intro, is the role of technology in both enabling and preventing illicit trade. So aside from e-commerce, and I'll start this with Stefano. What sort of technologies do you see, or have you seen, that are helping to benefit the prevention of illicit trade more than they're helping to benefit criminals?
Like asking me difficult questions, Chris. And happily taking
because I know you can handle them, Stefano.
I appreciate it. Look, I think I'll be very short on this, although we could say many things about this on this topic. What I wanted to share with you and the colleagues and the other participants is that I think that overall, some recent law enforcement operations that have been carried out in 2021 have shown that the police, or general law enforcement agencies, when they want and when they have the necessary resources, the police are capable of breaking the veil of anonymity, which technology, beyond which technology shields criminals, their transactions, and proceeds of crime in a way. So it's possible. And I think, most of you probably are aware of what happened a few months ago, but there was a spectacular law enforcement operation led by the FBI and the Australian police. It was called Operation ANOM, if it's pronounced correctly, and that was a successful one because the police managed to install a Trojan horse into the cell phones of members of several criminal syndicates. And these criminals were using these cell phones thinking that they were using an encrypted communication system while they were openly discussing the shipments of cocaine from South America and other illicit trade crimes, right? And this operation led to over 800 arrests in 16 countries. At some point, they decided to stop it because they had too much information to process. Just one additional example, technologies used by criminals and by law enforcement, cryptocurrencies. This year, the US Department of Justice managed to recover most of the bitcoins that colonial pipelines, like the energy suppliers in the US, most of the bitcoins the colonial pipelines paid to hackers in ransom. They did it for the equivalent of $4 million US. So to make a long story short, I think that using a mix of technological savvy and old-fashioned reliance on informants and deception and undercover operations will still have some cards to play and to do something important in the technology against illicit trade, leveraging also technology. So it's really a double-edged sword. And these recent examples that I made, I think, show something important about the fact that law enforcement is not is not losing. It's probably not winning, but it still has important cards to play.
Sure. Thank you for that, Stefano. Laurent, if you'd like to make a remark on the way that Syngenta uses technology to combat illicit trade, that would be much appreciated.
Sure. So you might not be surprised to hear me saying those two letters, AI. Why? You know, we have to stop underestimating the enemy. Organized crime used to be not so organized. These were local mafia groups, maybe dealing, with family networks from one country to the other. With the size of their business, and as Arndt mentioned that earlier, this is a huge industry now. So they need to operate internationally, and they need to operate fast. They need to find new tactics when we block them. So we do a lot of monitoring on most of the countries where we are present, on the traditional online platforms, but also because the criminals are smart enough, they don't always go onto those big ones. They go sometimes on local ones to try to fly under radar detection. So we monitor a huge amount of different platforms and social media feeds. What do we do with this huge volume of data? How can we make sense, and how can we find the magic to correlate two pieces of information together because they are connected to the same case, and we can see that cell phone number or that piece of data is connected to another piece of data that has, from the look at it, nothing to do one with the other. We would need an army of people if we would do this manually. Now we have, and it would cost us a huge budget if we would use external providers, and there's many of them that are, illicit trade being also a subject that many companies try to develop solutions and sell those solutions at a high price to companies that are fighting. So we looked at developing this ourselves internally with the support from our IT colleagues, but also hiring young tech talents that are super strong and super fast at developing our own algorithm to be able to connect the dots. So to conclude, if you like, I would say that we use artificial intelligence to help us connect the dots in what is becoming a criminal big data challenge that we need to address.
Same question to you. How is Philip Morris International using technology to combat illicit trade?
Technology plays a key role. I mentioned before that to fight illicit trade, you need a comprehensive strategy, and a comprehensive strategy that covers, first of all, what we do in-house in terms of know your customers, so know who you sell to, know your payments, and so on and so forth, exchange of information with law enforcement, regulation. But technology is playing more and more an important role. What we are doing, it's not a silver bullet, but it is playing an important role. What we are doing in technology, a couple of things I will mention. One is track and tracing. So each of our products, each pack of cigarettes has a specific and unique code on it. There's not a barcode which is the same on all the products, like a bottle of Coca-Cola or water has the same. No, this one, each pack has a name. And therefore, we track that code and that pack throughout the supply chain. And once if we find that those product in the seizures, we can go back and see where the product diverted the illegal supply chain. So we can go and pinpoint in which warehouse, and then we can take action and measures to stop it. So track and tracing is playing an extremely important role in order to keep secure our supply chain. And then artificial intelligence. I think Laurent made it quite clear. There's so much data out there There's so much digital fingerprint. You don't imagine what you do when you have your phone and you call and it's tracked, but you need artificial intelligence in order to put together all those data and to make sense of it. I'm a strong believer that the technology in general, without going in any specific form, is really increasing transparency, and therefore, by definition, organized crimes want to work in the shadows and in the darkness. So I do think that technology increasing transparency will, in the long run, be an extremely important weapon in order to fight illicit trade, organized crime, and so on. So I'm optimistic that technology is on the right side.
Okay, thank you for that, Alvis. Arndt, I think you're going to get the last word here. We're running out of time, so you have sort of a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes to weigh in on this subject.
Thank you very much. Let me underline what the speaker talked about, artificial intelligence and the role of technology. Of course, technology is a big driver for the criminal actors. So the reaction must be, we have also to use the technology. So let's use. And the financial intelligence units in Germany has very bad media in the past 2 years. Not because they have not enough men and women power, because they had a bad organization to handle all that money laundering cases, or maybe money laundering cases. So now they are working for, I don't know how long, but you can also read that in some reports. Now the financial intelligence unit should have artificial intelligence to find the link between information A, information B to information C, what you mentioned, Laurent, before. That's very, very important. So in that way, also in Germany, we use that. Track and trace, Alvis, very, very important technical thing. Also, we have that for medical products. We have that track and trace, and if we can, and also other industries should use track and trace to make safer the supply chain. Very, very important. But on the other hand, we can use technology more. We create 3 years ago a web crawler to identify illegal pharmacies online. But don't be surprised, nobody want to have that. Customs don't want to use that. Police don't want to use that. Prosecutors don't want to use that. Because of the principle of legality, if you crawl the illegal pharmacies, you have to prosecute. But who? You need personnel, you need organization, you need structure, you need manpower, you need money. So that's the other side of technology. We can do a lot, but we don't use, otherwise we find too much cases. And how to handle that case, it's a strange situation. But last but not least, yes, technology is a key driver. And as a professor of law, I have to be also a little bit, how can I say, encrochet and Anna. That is a big challenge for us. Of course, next year, the reports regarding organized crime in a lot of countries must be new. We'll have a lot of information about organized crime. It opened the window to a lot of information about organized crime we never had before. Insights. But from the law perspective, Germany did nothing for that investigation, Anna. Everything is coming from the FBI. We only took the information, but now we have a lot of cases here, and we have also a lot of decisions from high courts. They dealing how to use that proofs. Is that legal? Is that illegal? Because we are in the law enforcement in the different countries. We are on
I'm sorry. We're going over time here. I'm gonna have to stop you. I'm sure you could talk about this for an hour or more on your own, and all of you could. But I want to thank each of you for joining us for this discussion. It was fascinating. some of the some discouraging developments and some somewhat semi-cheering developments. But I want to thank you again, and I want to thank the audience for joining, and I want to thank Philip Morris International for supporting today's event. So I think we'll end it there. So thank you again.